Hello everyone, I am Tacet, and today I'm going to be going over the top 10 troops that don't need traits to be able to function that well. These are standalone troops that you won't need to have to waste all your trait stones on in order to use effectively. Many of these either have really bad traits, or they don't really need their traits to fully utilize their ability and stats. So let's get into them. First up, in number 10, we have Skeleros. For the most part, his traits aren't really going to do anything. You have Undead Bond, that'll help a little bit. He gains a little bit of extra attack, and he has Reinforce, which all together won't really accumulate too much. And what he does for ability is double the amount of skulls. The card in general isn't really used that much. You, of course, use it with a skull spawning deck. There isn't anything that currently exists in the game that synergizes exceptionally well with it, but as far as its ability goes alone, you don't really need the traits to fully utilize it. Next up, we have the Set-type Warrior. You don't normally use many of this. All of the hearts are basically useless abilities. They'll just give anywhere from like 1 to 4 HP, which isn't really that much. Avenger is somewhat okay, but he does give armor, so you're not going to have that many things dying. And he has Reinforced, which for the most part you won't be using, because Set-type Warrior will most likely be casting his ability, his armor buff, and then the random split damage based on armor on things other than himself. He'll not that likely that he'll actually be aiming at himself for that buff, so you don't really need to reinforce that much as well. Next up, we have Finley, who is fairly underused these days, but is a very decent skull counter. Actually, one of the best skull counters in the game. Main reason he's not used that much is, of course, if you're countering skulls, the match may go slower because you kind of need the skulls as well to be able to do attack damage to the enemy. As far as his traits go, they're pretty much useless. Silence is basically never used in the game anymore. Merchant, you never really need. This 25% doesn't raise the PvP that you get or any other kind of gold. It just raises like the 110 gold cap, I think it is, that you get every single map. So it doesn't even raise that. It just makes it easier to get that 110 cap. So pretty useless. And of course he has Human Bond, which isn't going to do that much since he doesn't really synergize that well with other humans. And his ability alone, it transforms all skulls to random to a color of choice. That's actually a pretty good ability. Not really used that much in mainstream overpowered teams as far as the meta is currently concerned, but you definitely never need to trade him, and he works perfectly fine without a single trait, and you get a bunch of gold. Next up is Goblin King. Goblin King is a little bit weird. The only two that is kind of nice is Sturdy plus Regeneration. That'll make sure you don't really take all of the ticking damage on his HP. But that legendary ability of 20 life in the last slot is pretty bad for the most part, because you can easily just devour that or instantly kill that or anything of the such. And there's also many instances in which Goblin King would be placed in a position other than the last slot, because many teams for him, you wouldn't really need him in the last slot. He's actually a little bit better in the third slot. Either the third or first slot, or third or second slot, not first. Third or second slot, he's actually pretty good. So you wouldn't really need his legendary ability. And Regeneration is Sturdy, isn't really going to be doing that much. And he, of course, gains some life at a 2-to-1 ratio based on the amount of gems he removes, and then summons a goblin. And summoning a goblin part is basically the best part of his ability. Next up, we have the Barbarius. One of the only troops in the game with a 3x boost ratio, deals damage to a random enemy, and is boosted by brown gems destroyed with the explosion by a 3x ratio. And it's kind of the same deal that basically the same deal we just saw in Goblin King. It has both Sturdy and Regeneration, which is a decent combo, but for the most part, you don't really need it. Same as Avenger, you'll only be getting a little bit of attack from it, and his ability on its own will do all the work you need, and you don't really need to waste on getting these traits. One other thing to mention that I actually haven't been mentioning during most of these is whenever you see an epic, like these are epics, they cost 14 arcane trait stones. Like, let me go through real quick. If you wanted to upgrade Skeleros for these barely any traits, this will cost 14 arcane trait stones plus everything else. Setite is 3. Finley is 14. Goblin King is 16, and Barbarius is 14. So anything that's epic or legendary is more likely to be on this list because they have such an excessively high amount of arcane trait stones that they need compared to what their abilities do. Because epics don't get legendary abilities. They don't have any kind of unique abilities on them. So they tend to be not worth it in many instances. And as we say that, another epic, Dokapher. Really, really good early game troop now that summoning has been buffed recently, or last patch, 2 patches ago. 2.0 it got patched. I don't know if consoles still have it yet, or don't have it yet, but he summons a giant spider, and that giant spider then summons a spider swarm. So you get a lot of summons out of him. And as far as traits, you don't really need it. He just has a immunity to poison. For some reason, he has 2 immunities. There's a couple of troops like this. And it's basically a waste any troop that has 2 immunities instead of just straight out impervious. And he has Demonic Pact, which is only a 25% chance to actually summon something. So there are many instances where Dokapher, a fully traded Dokapher, won't even trigger a single one of his traits during a duration of the game, which is pretty bad. So you don't need traits on him, but his ability alone is fairly good. Next up, we have Winter Knight. Winter Knight actually has fairly decent traits. The main reason he is on this list is because he is the tankiest troop in the game with no traits. If you compare every single troop in the game that has no traits, he is definitely the tankiest. Fortress Gate would have like the highest durability, but what actually makes him tankier is his ability. He explodes a mana gem, which means you'll be able to get mana for it. Plus, the explosion, you might even be able to get the rest of his mana up if you aim it correctly. And then he gains a lot of armor, and that's boosted by blue gems, which is a 2x ratio. So you can get a lot of extra armor. You could get like 6 to 10 extra armor or so on him just for casting that. And on top of all that, he gains, which is even more than Fortress Gate, by the way. And on top of all that, he even gains a barrier, which will negate 1 whole instance of damage. So that can negate anything like 10 or 20 or 30, however much they're going to do to you. That's 1 whole damage instance is completely nullified. So a very, very powerful tank with no traits. Of course, out of everything on this list, this would probably be one of the only ones on this list that you'd like consider trading, because he only does take 2 arcane trait stones. Somewhat easy to trait, but you do not need his traits to make him functional. Like I said, he's essentially the best tank in the game with no traits, comparing it to all other troops when they have no traits. Next up, we have Rwani. Quite a strong troop in early game, or pretty much always. Deals, most of you know it. You get it from completing the Forest of Florence questline. It deals damage randomly split among all enemies. Doesn't get that much magic damage, but what really makes up the majority of its damage is that it is boosted by armor at not a 1x, but a 2x ratio, which makes it very, very powerful. The only really good trait that it has is actually reinforced, because every time you regain 1 armor, you will be gaining essentially 2 extra damage. But Water Spirit, you're only going to be getting like 1 or 2 magic. You won't have that many blues on a Rwani team. And Nature Link, same deal. You'll probably only get like 2 or 3 extra HP. It's absolutely nothing. You really don't need her traits. One other thing, if you do have her completely untraded, that you can do is just place Barrier on her with something like a Priestess, which gives armor buff. And then you'll be giving her armor buff, and she will have a damage instance, since Barrier will just block 1 full damage. So that'll help protect her armor if you don't have her traded. So you really don't need any traits on Rwani, especially since she is an epic. They will cost 14 arcane trait stones plus all the other trait stones. So a little bit expensive for basically nothing. Next up is Bull Taurus. This would probably be number 1. The main reason it isn't number 1 is because consoles, I don't believe, have the buff on him yet. Recently in 2.01, like 1 or 2 weeks ago, on PC and mobile, Bull Taurus got a buff of a 1-to-2 ratio up to a 1-to-1 ratio based on his HP. He's kind of like Rwani except for HP. He deals damage randomly split among enemies, more than Rwani, by the way. And then it's boosted by life, which is less than Rwani, but it's a lot easier to get higher life than it is to get higher armor in most instances, especially since life is more valuable than that of armor. And as far as traits go, he has Frenzy, which is very useless, because with Bull Taurus, you want to make sure he's never taking damage on his HP. And this frenzy basically benefits whenever you take damage. So you're pretty much trying to avoid even triggering this trait if you're trying to use his ability correctly. Sturdy. Sturdy's actually could make him even worse. It's kind of funny. He would be better just with his first trait than he would be with his first 2 traits. Because Sturdy, of course, places poison. But if poison triggers, that would actually give him +1 attack, which is kind of weird. It actually stops... Sturdy actually stops his frenzy from working, which is a very bad combination to have on him. And his only actually good trait is regeneration, but same as Rawani, who had it reinforced his last one. But for the most part, you don't really need it, especially since these 2 traits basically negate each other. And basically, his whole trading just needs like a rework. But yeah, it doesn't really work that well. You do not need any traits on him to make him function. You can even see I don't even have any traits on him. Plus, he isn't epic, so it will cost 14 arcane trait stones and everything else if you were to trade him up. So you really don't need to. And lastly, I think some of you might know which one this is going to be since I haven't mentioned it yet. Tyree! Tyree is very weird. The only somewhat good trait is stealthy, but for the most part, you wouldn't really need it. What is the weirdest thing about her is that she has an arcane as her last trait. Like, I could see this maybe as her first trait, but as a last trait, it is a really, really bad design choice because her ability, it destroys a lot of gems of a chosen color, gain 5 gold, and then, of course, the main reason everyone uses her, or a lot of people early game anyways, is a 20% chance to also gain a treasure map, which will essentially allows you to play the treasure map minigame as much as you want, basically for free. Just do like an hour of map farming and you have as many maps as you'll need for like the entire day, maybe even the whole week, depending on how hard you farm and how many you actually do in a week. What's really weird is she destroys a lot of gems. Like, there won't ever really be more than 15 of a single gem on the board. Maybe slightly more in some instances, but very, very rarely. And she has Arcane, which gives her 1 magic every single time. All that's raising is how many gems she destroys. Like, early on in the game, you're not going to be having this kind of amount of destroy gems. You're going to have something like 6, 7, maybe 8, maybe a little bit higher, 9 or 10, once you get her up to like level 18 and such. But it's still going to be a little bit lower, and that's when Arcane would somewhat be useful. But the problem with that is Arcane is her very last trait. So anyone who needs her Arcane trait won't be able to afford her Arcane trait, and anyone who can afford her Arcane trait doesn't need her Arcane trait. So it's pretty useless, her traits, pretty much is what I'm getting at. And yeah, as far as that goes, she also costs 14 arcane trait stones since she is an epic after all. And that is that. So yeah, that is my list of the top 10 troops that do not need traits in Gems of War. If you have any others that you want to mention, feel free to leave in the comment section. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. And thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.